Okay, let's carry on with agriculture, forestry, and fishing. The forests of southern Sudan yield hardwood timber such as mahogany and sant, a type of acacia, and softwoods. And softwoods. Gum arabic in southern Sudan is called gum africa, a water-soluble gum obtained from the acacia trees that is used in the production of adhesives, candy, and pharmaceuticals. It's an important agricultural export. The Nile rivers are the main sources of fish, especially Nile perch. Most of the catch is consumed locally. There is the potential to increase the amount of fish that is sold at the market and the possibility of having enough fish available to export, given proper support and development of the fishing industry. Transportation and storage limitations, however, have hindered such supports in the past. Let's look at the resources and power. Petroleum is by far southern Sudan's most important natural resource. Oil was first discovered in the southwestern Sudan, now part of South Sudan, in 1977, and a commercially viable find was made in 1980. The long-running civil war prevented any exploitation of the oil deposits. However, until the end of the 20th century, although the vast majority of these oil reserves are now in southern Sudan, the necessary infrastructure for transporting the oil goes through Sudan, its neighbor in the north. Other known resources include marble, mica, and uranium. Power sources used in southern Sudan vary across the urban and rural areas. Only a small portion of the population has access to electricity via public source or private generators. In urban areas, about 1/6 of the population has access to electricity as a source of lighting, while in rural areas, access is available to less than 1% of the population. At the time of independence, several new power stations were under construction or recently completed, promising to increase the amount of power available in the country. Firewood is an important fuel for cooking, used by almost all of the rural population and about 2/5 of the urban population. In the urban areas, charcoal is used by about half of the population for cooking. The country has considerable hydroelectric potential, but it's not fully developed but it was not fully developed at the time of independence. Let's look at manufacturing in southern Sudan. The manufacturing sector of the economy historically has been small, development being hindered by such factors such as the long-running civil war, as well as several shortages of trained manpower and raw materials. With the signing of the CPA in 2005, the Go SS began to look towards developing and expansion of this sector. There is some production of beer, soft drinks, sugar, and other food productions. Because of the long lack of basic infrastructure in many areas, the construction industry saw considerable growth as preparations were made for independence. Despite the lucrative oil fields in southern Sudan, there are no working refineries in the country, and oil pumped from southern Sudan must be refined in Sudan. Let's look at the finance and trade. After the signing of the CPA in 2005 and prior to Southern Sudan's independence, a dual banking system was in place in the region that recognized the Bank of Southern Sudan as the regional bank and the Central Bank of Sudan as the national bank. Prior to independence and shortly after, Southern Sudan used the Sudanese pound, the national currency of Sudan. Soon after Southern Sudan declared independence, the Central Bank of Southern Sudan became the national bank and a new currency. The Southern Sudan pound was introduced. In addition to the central bank, there are also commercial and foreign banks in the country. Southern Sudan's chief export is crude petroleum. Other exports include gum arabic. Because of the food insecurity and limited manufacturing sector, the country must import most items, including many foodstuffs, motor vehicles and machinery, and manufactured goods. Southern Sudan participates in the trade organizations in the region. It became a member of the East African Community in 2016, and it's been approved for membership in the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa (COMESA), although it has not finally been made a member state yet. Let's check out the services. The fledgling service sector consists primarily of government employees and small businesses, largely shops and restaurants that have been opening in Southern Sudan since the signing of the 2005 CPA. Southern Sudan shows promising potential for a lucrative tourism industry, as it's known for its scenic beauty and diverse array of wildlife and vegetation, and is home to many national parks and game reserves. The government has encouraged the growth of hotels and the hospitality industry, which is much needed to support the growth of tourism. Labor and taxation. Agriculture is the main area of employment in Southern Sudan, with some 4/5 of all households depending on agriculture activities as their main source of livelihood. Historically, the limited industrial sector and the predominance of rural life have largely negated the need for workers and employers associations. Regardless, trade unions have been banned in Southern Sudan since 1989, which affected Southern Sudan until its 2011 independence. Prior to the independence, most of the government's revenue was derived from its oil revenue sharing arrangement with the national government in Khartoum. Similar arrangements were expected to continue after the succession of Southern Sudan. Very little revenue is raised by direct or indirect taxation. Let's check out the transportation and telecommunications. Now, Southern Sudan's transport system is underdeveloped and is a serious constraint in the economic growth. Excuse me for a minute, I need to take some water, drink some water. Much better. Okay, so prior to the region's success from the north, it was estimated that there's been between 2,500 to 3,400 miles of main roads, of which only some 30 miles were paved. There are also about 4,700 miles of secondary roads unpaved and in various states of disrepair. The utility of the unpaved road is comprised during the rainy season. The utility of the unpaved roads is compromised during the rainy season, when many of them are impassable. There are about 150 miles of railway track linking the city of Wau with Sudan. After years of despair due to long-running conflict, the Lairi line resumed operations in 2010. It's used to transport freight. Road construction and expanding the Lairi system has been priorities of the government. Southern Sudan is landlocked arid. Southern Sudan is landlocked, and its rivers, particularly the White Nile and its tributaries, are important transportation links. The White Nile and the Bahr al Ghazal are navigable throughout the year, and the streamer services are available on the White Nile. Ports include those of Juba and Bor, located in the Mountain Nile, and at Malak on the White Nile. The country has several dozens airfields, but fewer have paved runways, and as a result, many are impossible during the rainy season. By far, the busiest facility is the international airport at Juba. Other heavily used airports include those at Malakal, Rumbek, and Wau. Southern Sudan is served by several international and domestic airlines, including Southern Sudan Airlines, which was created in 2005 to serve the newly semi-autonomous region. Decades of civil war have hindered the development of telecommunication infrastructure in Southern Sudan, but this area has seen quite a bit of expansion since the CPA was signed in 2005. There are no networks of landlines or telephone service, but mobile phone providers have established coverage in and around the country's main cities and towns. Internet service is available in many of the main cities and towns. Let's see the government and society, constitutional framework, and history. The creation of the semi-autonomous region of Southern Sudan was provided for by the 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, that ended the long-running civil war between North and South. The region was administered under the Constitution for Southern Sudan, promulgated in December 2005, as well as the country's international interim constitution, promulgated in July 2005. The latter document provided for the handling of many conflicts. The latter document provided for the handling of any conflicts that might occur between the two concurrent levels of government. Both documents were superseded by the Transitional Constitution prepared for governing Southern Sudan upon its 2011 succession from Sudan. Under the 2011 Transitional Constitution, Southern Sudan was a republic. Executive power was vested in the president and the vice president, who was appointed by the president. Upon the independence, the directly elected incumbent president of Southern Sudan region became president of the country for a 4-year term. Legislative power was bicameral, comprising the National Legislative Assembly and the Council of States. Upon independence, the National Legislative Assembly body was consisted of members of the previous regional legislative body and Southern Sudan Legislative Assembly, and the Southern Sudanese who had seats in Sudan's National Assembly. The majority of the National Legislative Assembly members were directly elected. The rest were elected from closed lists to ensure proportional representation for women and various other groups. Upon independence, the Council of States consisted of all South Sudanese who had been elected by state legislatures to seats in Southern Sudan's Council of States, as well as 20 members appointed by Southern Sudan's president. The UNLA, or the National Legislative Assembly, and Council of State members were to serve a 4-year term. The current framework. Following the civil war that broke out in December 2013, a peace agreement signed on August 2015 provided for the creation of transitional power sharing government that would include members of the current administration as well as members from the Labours. It was implemented on April 2016 that was intended to function for 30 months, with among its tasks the goal of organizing elections 60 days prior to the end of the transitional period. The incumbent president remained in peace and appointed a first vice president selected from the Labour group in accordance with the terms of the peace agreement. After the creation of the transitional government, the administration had 90 days to transform to the National Legislative Assembly into the Transitional National Legislative Assembly, which included members of the former plus an additional 68 members, 50 from the Southern Sudan Armed Opposition, 1 former detainee, and 17 from other political parties. The other legislative bodies, the Council of States, remained unchanged in the new transitional government. Let's look at the local government. For administrative purposes, Southern Sudan is divided into states. At independence, there were about 10 states, but a December 2015 decree by the president abolished them and replaced them with 28 new states. The new administration structure was highly controversial as it interfered with the power sharing arrangements as outlined in the fragile peace agreement signed by the government and the labor forces in August 2015. Let's look at this justice. The constitution for Southern Sudan provides for an independent judiciary. The Supreme Court is the highest court. The country also has 3 courts of appeal, and each state has a high court, country court, and town and city courts. Political process. The multi-party politics banned after 1989 coup were reintroduced in 1999. And both the 2005 National Interim Constitution and the 2005 Regional Constitution continued to provide for multi-party politics, as did Southern Sudan's 2011 Transitional Constitution. In Southern Sudan, the primary political parties are the ruling parties, the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement and its offshoot, and the Sudan's People's Liberation Movement for Democratic or the Democratic Change. Other political parties active in the country include the Union of Sudan African Parties, the Southern African National Union, the Southern Sudan Democratic Forum, the United Democratic Salvation Front, the National Congress Party, formerly the Islamic National Front, long the only legal party in Sudan, has a limited presence in Southern Sudan. Under the 2005 Constitution in Southern Sudan, at least 25% of the legislative seats were to be filled by women, which was continued under the 2011 Transitional Constitution. A portion of the seats is also allocated to members of opposition parties not otherwise directly elected. Security. The primary labor army in Southern Sudan during the Second Civil War, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, formed the basis of the Southern Sudan Army. Some of the smaller southern labor groups were disbanded, although some remained active in the years after the CPA. The United Nations mission in Sudan has had peacekeeping troops in the area since 2005. The United Nations authorized a new mission, the United Nations Mission in the Republic of Southern Sudan, in July 2011. Let's look at the health and welfare. Varying ecological conditions in Southern Sudan, poor hygiene, and widespread malnutrition result in a high incidence of fatal infectious diseases. The most common illnesses are malaria, measles, and tuberculosis. Meningitis and cholera also occur. Many tropical diseases such as are endemic in the country, including bilharzia and guinea worm and sleeping sickness. Overall, Southern Sudan has had a relatively low prevalence rate of HIV/AIDS, with urban areas and border areas typically having higher rates of the virus and disease. The low rate has largely due to the isolation caused by the long-running civil war. However, there is a risk that the rate might increase, given the increase of travel since 2005, CPA, and the high prevalence of HIV/AIDS in some of its neighboring countries. The legacy of the decades of civil war in Sudan, fought primarily in what is now Southern Sudan, has negatively impacted the general quality of life and the welfare of Southern Sudan's residents. About half of the population lives below the poverty line. After the 2005 CPA, efforts were made to improve living conditions, although such remained to be done. The outbreak of the civil war in 2013 also led to a humanitarian crisis for many of the Southern Sudan residents, forcing them to flee the fighting without adequate food, shelter, and medical attention. Malnutrition is prevalent year-round, especially among children. The infant mortality and maternal mortality rates in Southern Sudan are among the highest in the world. Education in Southern Sudan. Prior to the independence in 1956, the British colonial administration had little educational infrastructure established in Southern Sudan, and the Christian missionaries assumed responsibility for formal education there. Southern education suffered during the Sudan's subsequent civil war of 1955 up to 1972, and from 1983 up to 2005. The national authorities curtailed missionary activities, attempted to Arabize the southern schools, and failing that, closed them in 1962. The Southern partisans operated schools in the areas they controlled, but their resources were extremely limited. Beginning in the late 1980s, UNICEF coordinated educational instruction efforts in Southern Sudan, but limited resources continue to be a stumbling block, as was the ongoing civil war conflict, which continued to negatively affect access to the schooling. As a result, for decades, many Southern Sudanese were deprived of the opportunity for an education. Under the Southern Sudan's current system, there are two general education tracks. The formal track includes an 8-year primary school beginning at age 6, followed by 4 years of secondary school, and then post-secondary training and 4 years of tertiary education. The track includes the provision of 3 years of pre-primary schooling, but implementation of this option has been slow. An alternative track in which 8 years of primary education are condensed into 4 years of instruction exists for students of all ages who have had limited access to schooling. English is the second language of English is the language of instruction in Southern Sudan's education system, although indigenous Southern Sudanese languages are also used in early years of primary education. The policy has created some difficulty for a number of teachers of whom were trained to teach with Arabic as the second language of instruction. Even after the 2005 CPA ended the war, and amid efforts to increase education opportunities in the South, only about one-half of the school-aged children have access to education. For school-age females, access is even more limited, and many drop out within the first years because of cultural pressures, such as tendency to marry at a young age. In addition, the educational system is further stressed by the lack of school buildings, teaching materials, and limited number of qualified teachers. The education system was greatly disrupted by the civil war and began in 2013. Higher education in Southern Sudan is provided in several institutions, including the University of Juba, the capital city, the University of Bahr el Ghazal in Wau, and Upper Nile University in Malakal. During the war, these universities were relocated in the north for safety reasons. In the years after CPA, efforts were made to reopen the facilities in the south. The fact that Southern Sudan is ravaged by decades of civil war has also deprived was also deprived of an adequate education system, evident in its literacy rates, which are among the lowest in the world. Only about a fourth, only about one fourth of the adults are able to read. There is a higher rate of literacy in urban areas, where roughly one half of the adult population is able to read. There is also a discrepancy in literacy rates between the men and women. Some 2/5 of the men are literate, whereas only 1/6 of the women are able to read. Let's look at the cultural life. There are several different ethnic groups in southern Sudan, each with a long history of customs and traditions. Despite decades of long attempt by the northern-based national government of Sudan to Arabize the southern region in the 20th century, a rich cultural diversity still exists in southern Sudan. Some aspects, let's look at the daily life and social customs. Some aspects of Sudan's traditional cultures have weakened with the passage of time. Indeed, the advances of modern society, such as improved communication, opportunities for increased social and economic mobility, and the spread of money economy, as well as decades of warfare and displacement, have led to the general loosening in the social ties, customs, relationships, and modes of organization in traditional cultures. Still, much from the past remains intact. One of the most important forms of cultural expression among non-literate groups in southern Sudan is the oral tradition. It is used as a vehicle for the creative expression of folklore and myths, as well as the recounting of history and traditions. It's also used as a font of guidance and advice for dealing with typical life events. Many southern Sudan's groups mark the stages of life cycle of the individual: birth, circumcision, puberty, marriage, and death, with ritual and ceremonial practices. Facial scarring and tattooing as methods of ritual endowment are common. Most groups observe patrilineal descent, but the significance of such agnation ties among kin groups differs from one society to another. Polygamy is practiced in some groups and regarded as a means of extending a final in-law relationship and acquiring support. Although divorce is now common, in the past a broken marriage was considered a shameful thing because it destroyed the network of relationships. Most groups have historically had some form of class distinction. Okay, cuisines vary throughout the country, and among the ethnic groups, grains such as millet, sorghum are popular sources of sustenance and are supplemented by the variety of fresh fruit, vegetables, legumes grown in the country. When available, fish is a common source of protein among the riverine communities, whereas other groups rely on meat and milk products from their livestock. A paste made from the peanut may accompany meats and vegetables. Examples of these foods and dishes enjoyed in the country include kasra, a white flat bread that accompanies many meals; asida, a porridge made from sorghum that is often served with meat or vegetables; and ful, a dish with a basis of mashed fava beans and spices that may have various other foods added to them. Western style clothing is common, especially in the cities and towns. Traditional dress varies throughout the country and among ethnic groups. Because of the hot climate, clothing tends to be loose-fitting and light material. Holidays observed in southern Sudan include the Sudan Independence Day on January the 1st, marking Sudan's independence from Great Britain and Egypt in 1956. Peace Agreement Day on January the 9th, commemorating the signing of the 2005 CPA. The SPL Day on May the 16th, marking the day in 1883 that the Southern troops revolted, leading to a resumption into the fight for independence, and Martyrs' Day on July 30th, the anniversary of the death of the Labour leader John Garang de Mabio, used to commemorate the death of those who died during the long-running civil war. The country's large Christian population celebrates Easter and Christmas Day is a public holiday in Southern Sudan. Let's look at the arts in Southern Sudan. Southern Sudan's various ethnic groups have a history of producing various handcrafts. The Zande, for example, were prominent as craftsmen and artists. Their superior material culture, particularly their knives, spears, and shields, was one of the factors by which they dominated the neighbors and brought about the spread of their culture. Basketry, net weaving, pottery, melting, metalworking, and iron and wood carving are also undertaken. Contemporary Zande are still noted for their iron, clay, and wood handcrafts. Some modern Southern Sudanese artists include painters who use acrylic water or oil paints. Music is an integral part of the cultural traditions of Southern Sudan's ethnic groups, such as many ritual ceremonies are accompanied by singing and playing the musical instruments. A variety of musical styles are enjoyed as entertainment in Southern Sudan. There is a traditional style of music in which singers perform without musical accompaniment or with only a limited drum beat. Western music styles such as hip hop and reggae are popular. Also popular is a music style known as Sudanese or Sudanic fusion, which is a melding of Arabic and African rhythms. Dance is an integral part of the cultural traditions of Southern Sudan's ethnic groups. Let's look at some of Southern Sudan's cultural institutions. So Southern Sudan has a rich, long cultural history. However, decades of marginalization by the northern-based government of Sudan, the long-running civil war conflict, and the necessary focus on constructing basic infrastructure has meant that historically only limited resources could have been devoted to cultural institutions. There is the Nyakuroni Culture Center in Juba, which hosts many cultural and social events. This mausoleum of rebel leader John Garang, also in Juba, is a site of importance. Sports and recreation. Wrestling is a traditional sport in Southern Sudan. Wrestling matches are often a component of festivals that mark the end of the agriculture season and included spectacular involvement in the form of singing and dancing in support of one of the competitors. Basketball is also played, and some internationally known basketball players have come from what is now Southern Sudan, including Manute Bol and Luol Deng. Soccer was long popular in Sudan. The country was one of Africa's first football powers. However, the long-running civil conflict disrupted organized play. Since the end of the conflict, football has gained in popularity in Southern Sudan, particularly because of the efforts of the government and other groups to organize sporting activities for the Southern Sudan's youth. Although decades of civil conflict severely limited recreational opportunities, Southern Sudan is home to an abundance of natural features conducive for outdoor activities. There are several national parks and reserves that offer opportunities for such activities such as hiking, bird watching, whitewater rafting, and sport fishing. Media and publication. Because of the high literacy rate in Southern Sudan, radio is the most popular form of mass communication. There are several government or private radio stations operating throughout parts of the country that provide news, educational instruction, and entertainment in several languages. The government also owns a television broadcasting station in Juba. Newspapers are common in the cities, and these include diaries and weeklies in the English language, as well as a limited number in the Arabic language. All right, so we've come to the end of our fun and interesting facts. I want to thank you so much. So if you've made it this far, once again, this was read to you by yours truly, Christine, courtesy of Exhibit Africa Ubuntu Initiative. Please don't forget to support our initiative by going to our business page, and the business page will lead you to the link for our virtual online shop. So feel free to pick out some beautiful items for you or your loved ones. So this was compiled by Britannia.com if you want to check them out. Until our next series, as we follow another African country. So we're done with Southern Sudan. So let's see which country. We've covered Somalia, we've covered South Africa, we've covered Sudan. What other country is left? That's the mystery. What other country under S is left? That's the mystery. All right, so until our next episode, please don't forget to subscribe so that you can catch up with all the other countries as we end to the very last one. Ciao for now.